The courthouse was alive with its usual hum, papers shuffling, attorneys whispering last-minute strategies, the echo of footsteps bouncing off the tall marble walls. It was the kind of day where everything felt predictable, another Tuesday where the law carried out its slow, deliberate business. People came and went through the heavy double doors at the front of the courthouse, most looking down at their phones or clutching documents, their thoughts elsewhere. No one expected anything extraordinary to happen. Why would they? But that was the thing about ordinary days. Sometimes they crack open without warning and spill out something no one could see coming. It started when a young black girl, no older than 14 or 15, stepped through the courthouse doors. She wasn't accompanied by anyone, no parent, no lawyer, just her small frame and the quiet determination etched onto her face. She wore jeans that had seen better days, a worn hoodie zipped up despite the heat outside, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. At first glance, she didn't seem like she belonged there. A kid in a place where serious matters were debated and decided, where lives were changed with the stroke of a judge's pen. She stood still just inside the entrance for a moment, as though gathering her courage. No one paid much attention to her. People rarely paid attention to someone they didn't think mattered. The security guards near the front were preoccupied with monitoring the line of visitors shuffling through the metal detector, their attention drifting from bag checks to idle conversation. The girl glanced around cautiously before walking toward the hallway leading to courtroom 2B, her small hands clutching something folded up neatly, almost nervously. No one really noticed her. Not yet. The judge sitting in courtroom 2B that day was Judge Elaine Harper, a woman known for her stern demeanor but fair rulings. She had presided over the bench for nearly 2 decades, and in all that time, nothing much surprised her anymore. She had seen it all: criminals breaking down into tears, lawyers crafting elaborate arguments to save their clients, families devastated by verdicts they couldn't bear to hear. Judge Harper believed she had a sense for people, for truth and lies, for right and wrong. She carried her authority like a shield and expected her courtroom to operate like clockwork. That was what she had expected when she walked in that morning. What she did not expect, what no one could have predicted, was the girl. At exactly 11:12 a.m. during a break between hearings, the young girl appeared in the doorway of courtroom 2B. Her entrance was quiet, almost unremarkable. The bailiff, an older man named Ron, who had worked alongside Judge Harper for years, glanced at her and frowned. Children didn't usually wander into the courtroom without an adult. "Hey kid," he said gruffly, his voice low enough not to disrupt the judge's break. "You lost." The girl shook her head. "I need to see the judge," she said softly, her voice so calm it caught him off guard. Ron's frown deepened. "What for?" The girl didn't answer. She looked past him, her gaze landing on the tall woman in the black robe seated at the bench. "It's important," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. Ron hesitated. He didn't want to bother Judge Harper with what could easily be nothing. A kid pulling some kind of prank, or maybe just confused. But there was something about the way she said it. The way she stood there, clutching that folded note like her life depended on it. Ron sighed. "Wait here." He walked over to the bench, lowering his voice as he leaned toward Judge Harper. "There's a kid out there asking to see you. Says it's important." Judge Harper glanced up from the file she had been reading, one brow arching. "A kid?" "Yes, ma'am. Says she's got something for you." Judge Harper leaned back in her chair, studying Ron's expression. He looked uneasy, though she couldn't place why. "Bring her up," she said simply. Ron turned and waved the girl forward. She moved quickly but deliberately, her footsteps light on the carpet. As she approached, the courtroom felt unusually quiet. The attorneys seated at their tables glanced up from their notes. The clerks paused in their tasks. Even the stenographer, typing out her transcription with mechanical precision, let her fingers rest for a moment. There was something about the girl, a tension she brought into the room, like a ripple spreading through still water. She stopped just a few feet from the bench. Judge Harper studied her carefully. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. The girl hesitated before answering. "Ava." "All right, Ava, what brings you here?" Ava didn't speak right away. Instead, she lifted her hand, the one holding the folded piece of paper. Her small fingers trembled slightly as she extended it toward Judge Harper. "I need you to read this," Ava said. Her voice was soft, but there was no mistaking the urgency in it. "Please." Judge Harper glanced down at the note, then back at the girl. Her years on the bench had taught her how to read people, how to sense when something wasn't right. And something about this felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, but it made her heart beat just a little faster. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her tone even. Ava didn't answer. She simply held the note out further, almost pleading with her eyes. The silence in the courtroom stretched. It was the kind of silence that made you hold your breath without realizing it. Judge Harper reached out and took the paper from the girl's hand. The note was neatly folded, the edges carefully creased. It felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. She unfolded it slowly, aware of the way everyone in the room was watching her, waiting. The moment her eyes fell on the words scrawled across the paper, Judge Harper's expression changed. Her lips parted slightly, her brows knitting together. It wasn't shock that crossed her face, but something deeper. Without a word, she stood up. "Ron," she said, her voice low but commanding, "lock the doors." Ron blinked. "Ma'am." "Lock the doors." The way she said it left no room for argument. Ron turned immediately, moving toward the double doors at the back of the room. The sound of locks clicking into place echoed through the sudden hush. People in the gallery began murmuring, exchanging confused glances. The attorneys looked at each other, unsure of what was happening. Judge Harper's eyes stayed on the note in her hand. Whatever was written there, it had changed everything in an instant. She looked back at Ava, who stood quietly, her face unreadable. "What is this?" Judge Harper asked, though her voice was quieter now. Ava didn't answer. She didn't need to. Judge Harper turned a gaze back to the courtroom, her face now set with a resolve that sent chills through those watching. "No one leaves this room," she announced. "Not until we figure out what's going on." The murmurs turned to full-blown whispers. Fear crept into the edges of the air like a shadow spreading across the room. What could possibly be on that note? What had made a judge, a woman who had seen and handled everything, react like this? And then there was Ava, still standing there, her hands empty now, her shoulders straight. She said nothing, did nothing. She simply watched as the room descended into uneasy confusion. The doors were locked. The judge held the note. And somewhere, deep in the heavy silence, the truth waited. What was written on that piece of paper? And why did it feel like everything had just changed? The tension inside courtroom 2B grew heavier with every passing second. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, as if exhaling would somehow shatter whatever fragile hold remained on the moment. Judge Harper stood behind her bench, the note still clutched tightly in her hand. She hadn't sat back down, hadn't moved, really, only stared at the small, calm girl who had delivered it. Ava didn't look scared or ashamed. She didn't even look nervous anymore. Instead, she just watched the judge waiting. Ron finished locking the last of the doors and turned to face Judge Harper, his face taut with confusion. "Judge," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "what's going on? You mind telling me what's on that paper?" Judge Harper's sharp gaze snapped up from the note, landing on Ron for just a moment before drifting to the gallery, where uneasy murmurs were beginning to spread again. People fidgeted in their seats. Lawyers exchanged glances. A man near the back whispered to his companion, "This some kind of drill or what?" "Quiet," Judge Harper said suddenly, her voice carrying over the low chatter. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was the kind of voice you listened to because ignoring it would be a mistake. The room fell silent again. She didn't answer Ron's question. Instead, she turned her attention back to Ava, her expression unreadable. "Who gave this to you?" she asked, holding the note up slightly. Ava's eyes didn't waver. "I can't tell you that," she said softly. "You can't," Judge Harper repeated, her voice firm. "Or you won't." The girl didn't answer. The air in the room shifted again, colder this time. Judge Harper felt a dull ache rising in her chest, though she couldn't explain why. The girl, this small, unremarkable girl, was calm in a way that didn't make sense. Most kids her age would be crying by now, stammering out apologies, or at least showing some fear. Ava did none of that. Instead, she just stood there, her hands now empty at her sides, as if her part in this was already done. Judge Harper turned the note over again in her hand. It was written hastily, the ink smudged in places, but the words were clear, and they were terrifying. She glanced quickly around the courtroom, her eyes narrowing as if searching for something, or someone, out of place. But everyone there appeared as confused as she was. Finally, she folded the note and slipped it into the inside pocket of her black robe. The courtroom was still locked tight, and though people were growing restless, no one dared challenge her. Not yet. Judge Harper's reputation as a no-nonsense, unshakable authority kept them frozen where they sat. Ron cleared his throat again, his unease evident in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Judge," he said carefully, lowering his voice just a little, "you know I trust you, but people are starting to look real spooked. I gotta know, what are we dealing with here?" Judge Harper turned to Ron, And for the first time since Ava handed her the note, her face softened, just slightly. "Ron," she said in a low voice, "I need you to trust me right now. I don't know what this is yet, but something is very, very wrong." Ron stared at her for a beat, clearly unsettled by the words. Judge Harper wasn't a woman who jumped at shadows. If she thought something was wrong, then there was something wrong. Finally, Ron nodded and stepped back, though his hand hovered close to the radio clipped to his belt, ready to call for backup if needed. The people in the gallery were growing louder again, whispers buzzing like flies. Someone finally spoke up, a middle-aged lawyer sitting near the front. He stood, adjusting his tie nervously. "Judge Harper, I apologize for speaking out of turn, but could you explain what's going on? Why are the doors locked? People have places to be." His voice wavered at the end, betraying the worry he tried to mask with professionalism. Judge Harper's eyes narrowed on him, and he quickly sat back down without another word. She wasn't going to explain herself, not yet. Not when she didn't have answers to give. Instead, she turned back to Ava. "You said this was important," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the rising noise. "Why me? Why bring this to me?" Ava's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "Because you're the only one who'll listen," she said softly. The words sent a chill through Judge Harper. Before she could respond, there was a sudden, sharp knock on the locked double doors at the back of the courtroom. The sound startled everyone, including Ron, who turned toward the door, his hand immediately on his belt radio. "Who is it?" he barked. No one answered. The knocks came again, louder this time. Bam, bam, bam. The tension in the room shifted again, tightening like a coiled wire. Judge Harper's shoulders straightened as her instincts sharpened. Something was off. Someone or something outside those doors wanted in. Ron glanced at the judge, waiting for direction. "Do I open it?" Judge Harper hesitated, her gut screaming no, but she couldn't ignore it. "Check who it is first," she said carefully. Ron stepped cautiously toward the doors, his boots thudding against the marble floor. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of his footsteps seemed deafening. When he reached the doors, he leaned close to the wood, pressing his ear against it. "Who's there?" he called out again, his voice worry. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice answered, "Sheriff's office." "Open up." Ron frowned and glanced back at Judge Harper, who gave him a small nod. Sheriff's deputies often came and went through the courthouse. Maybe someone had noticed something strange happening inside, or maybe they'd been sent by someone on the outside. Either way, they needed to know what was happening. Ron turned the lock and cracked the door open just slightly. "What's going on out there?" he asked, his voice sharp. But before he could finish, the door was shoved open hard, sending Ron stumbling backward. Several people gasped as 3 men in uniforms pushed their way into the room. Sheriff's deputies. Or at least, that's what their uniforms said. But something about them felt wrong. The lead deputy, a tall man with an unreadable expression, swept his gaze across the room. "Everyone stay where you are," he said coldly, his voice firm but emotionless. Judge Harper stood up straighter, her eyes narrowing. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. The man turned his head slightly, his gaze landing on Ava, and for the first time, something shifted in the girl's calm demeanor. Her eyes widened just slightly as she took a small step back. "I believe we're here for her," the man said flatly, pointing one gloved hand in Ava's direction. Judge Harper felt her pulse quicken. She stepped forward, placing herself between Ava and the men. "You have no business in my courtroom," she snapped. "I don't know what's going on here, but this girl is under my protection until I say otherwise." The man's gaze flicked to her, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something cold and dangerous. "I suggest you step aside, Judge," he said. Judge Harper didn't move. Her voice dropped lower, but it was steady as stone. "Not until someone tells me what this is about." The men didn't answer, but in that moment, Ava, who had been silent this whole time, did something unexpected. She grabbed Judge Harper's sleeve, her small fingers tugging urgently. "Don't let them take me," Ava whispered, her voice trembling now for the first time. Judge Harper looked down at her, at the fear finally surfacing in her eyes, and something clicked. Whatever this was, whatever these men wanted, it was far bigger than anything she'd realized. And there was no way she was letting this child go. The air in the courtroom felt thick, heavy with a tension no one dared disturb. Judge Harper stared at the men, these supposed deputies, her sharp instincts screaming that something was off. Their uniforms looked right, their demeanor official, but it was their eyes that betrayed them. Cold, flat, like they were just going through the motions of pretending to be human. Ava's small hand gripped Judge Harper's sleeve tighter, her knuckles pale from the pressure. The girl who had walked into this room so quietly, so composed, now looked genuinely afraid, and that fear was spreading. The people in the gallery, lawyers, clerks, everyone, were frozen in place, their eyes darting between the men at the door and the judge at the bench. "You've got no jurisdiction in this room unless you can prove otherwise," Judge Harper said firmly, her voice slicing through the silence. She looked at Ron, who was now back on his feet, his hand hovering near his belt radio. "Ron, get on the line with the real sheriff's office. Now." The tall man who had spoken first, clearly their leader, didn't so much as flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his gaze settling back on Ava. "Judge," he said slowly, his tone calm but chilling, "you don't understand the situation. That girl doesn't belong here. She needs to come with us. She's a concern." The way he said concern sent a shiver down Judge Harper's spine. What does that mean? Concern for who? What's going on here? Ava tugged at her sleeve again, and Judge Harper glanced down. "They're not real deputies," Ava whispered, her voice trembling but certain. "Please don't let them take me. You don't know what they'll do." Judge Harper's throat tightened. There was no question now. She wouldn't let this child go. Not until she knew exactly what was happening. "You're not taking her anywhere," Judge Harper said, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Ron, call it in." Ron gave a quick nod and raised his radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, this is courtroom 2B. We've got." Before he could finish, the lead man moved. It happened so fast that Judge Harper barely had time to react. The man lunged forward, snatching the radio from Ron's hand and tossing it across the room. It hit the marble floor with a loud crack, shattering into pieces. Gasps filled the room as Ron stumbled backward, his hand reflexively reaching for his holster. "Sit down," the man barked, his voice suddenly sharp, dangerous. Ron froze, his face pale. Judge Harper stepped forward, her expression fierce. "You're out of line," she snapped. "You've just assaulted my bailiff, and I will not." The man cut her off with a look. "Judge," he said, his voice soft again, like he was speaking to a child who didn't understand the rules. "This isn't a court matter. You can't protect her. Trust me when I say you don't want to get involved." Judge Harper clenched her fists at her sides, the weight of the note in her pocket burning against her skin. Whatever this was, it was bigger than her courtroom, bigger than any case she'd handled in her 20 years on the bench. And yet she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't ignore the girl's fear or the wrongness seeping from these men. "Who sent you?" Judge Harper demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward Ava with one gloved hand. "She's coming with us. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Ava let out a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. It was the first crack in the calm she had held so tightly until now. Her wide eyes flicked up to Judge Harper, silently pleading. Judge Harper had seen enough. "You're not touching her," she said, her voice like steel. "Ron, call the courthouse security." Ron hesitated only for a second before nodding and heading toward the small phone mounted on the wall near the judge's bench. But before he could reach it, one of the other men, silent until now, stepped into his path, blocking him. "Don't," the man said simply. Ron stopped short, his hand hovering near his belt again. "What's your problem?" he growled. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at Ron with that same cold, emotionless look, like he was waiting for something. Judge Harper felt her heart hammering in her chest, though her face betrayed none of it. She was out of options. If these men weren't real deputies, and she was certain, now that they weren't, then no one in the courthouse would recognize the threat they posed, and with the doors locked, no one was coming in or out unless she allowed it. "Ron," Judge Harper said quietly, never taking her eyes off the men. "Stay where you are." She turned her focus back to Ava. "Ava, listen to me," Judge Harper said softly, crouching slightly so she was eye level with the girl. "What's going on? Why are they after you?" Ava looked at her for a long moment, her face pale but resolute. "I can't say," she whispered. "If I tell you, it'll make everything worse." "Worse how?" Judge Harper pressed. Ava's lips trembled. "They don't want me to talk. They don't want anyone to know." The tall man stepped forward again, his boots clicking against the marble floor. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "We're done here." Judge Harper rose to her full height and stepped in front of Ava again, her black robe billowing slightly as she moved. "I told you already, this girl isn't leaving unless you show me the proper paperwork or identification." The man paused, his expression shifting into something colder. "Fine," he said softly. "We'll do it your way." He nodded to the other two men. Judge Harper's instincts screamed a warning just as the men began moving. One of them reached for Ron, grabbing him roughly by the arm, while the other turned toward the gallery. People cried out, some scrambling to their feet, panic breaking the silence. "Stop this!" Judge Harper shouted, slamming her gavel against the bench. The sharp crack of wood against wood rang through the chaos, but it did nothing to stop them. The tall man kept his gaze fixed on Ava as he advanced, his gloved hand reaching toward her. Ava backed up until her shoulders hit the side of the judge's bench. Her breath was quick and shallow, panic finally breaking through her calm exterior. "Please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at Judge Harper. Judge Harper didn't hesitate. She reached down and grabbed Ava's arm, pulling her up behind the bench in one swift motion. "Ron," she shouted. Ron, struggling against the grip of the man holding him, managed to shout back, "Go, Judge, get her out." The tall man's face twisted with something dark, anger, frustration, as he realized what was happening. "Don't you move," he roared, but Judge Harper ignored him. Pulling Ava along with her, Judge Harper moved quickly toward the back door behind the bench, the one leading to her private chambers. The girl stumbled as they moved, but she kept up, clutching Judge Harper's hand tightly. "Go, go," Judge Harper urged, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind them she could hear the sounds of shouting, of people screaming, of Ron fighting to hold the men off. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just knew one thing. She had to get this girl out of there. When they burst into her chambers, Judge Harper slammed the heavy door shut behind them and turned the lock. For a moment there was silence, broken only by their ragged breathing. Ava looked up at her, her face streaked with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Judge Harper knelt down in front of her, her hands on the girl's shoulders. "We're not out of this yet, Ava," she said softly. "But I promise you, I'm going to figure out what's going on. You're safe with me now." But even as she said it, Judge Harper knew deep down that nothing about this was over. And whatever truth was waiting on the other side of that locked door, it was going to change everything. Judge Harper could hear the muffled chaos on the other side of the heavy door. Angry shouts, the dull thud of something, or someone, slamming against the wood. The men were trying to get in. Her chambers, typically a place of quiet refuge, now felt like a fragile safe house. Ava stood close to her, small and shaking, her back pressed against a tall bookcase lined with law volumes. For the first time since this all began, the girl looked her age, young, vulnerable, and terrified. Judge Harper kept her eyes on the door, her mind racing. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. "Ava," she said quietly but firmly, "how much time do we have before they find another way in?" Ava swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Not long. They're not normal. They'll find a way." The judge's pulse quickened at the words. Not normal. The girl had said it like it was a fact, like she wasn't just scared of those men. She knew something about them, something no one else did. Judge Harper turned and crouched in front of Ava, gripping her shoulders lightly. "Ava, I need you to trust me. If I'm going to help you, I need to know what's happening. Why are they after you?" Ava's wide eyes locked onto hers, full of tears that hadn't yet fallen. "They think I know something. About them." "Who are they?" Judge Harper asked, keeping her voice steady, trying to piece this together. Ava shook her head. "I don't know exactly. I just know they're not who they say they are. And they don't want anyone to find out." She paused, her voice growing fainter. "People disappear when they do. If they take me, you won't see me again." Judge Harper felt her stomach tighten at those words. Whatever Ava knew, whatever this was, it was big. Bigger than a runaway kid. Bigger than a courthouse locked down. And the men outside the door weren't playing by any rules she knew. The loud bang of something heavy striking the door made them both jump. It was followed by another and another. Each blow rattled the hinges, sending vibrations through the walls. Judge Harper stood, her thoughts a blur of urgency and instinct. "They're trying to break through." She scanned the room quickly, her eyes landing on the large wooden desk against the far wall. "Help me move this," she said, motioning to Ava. Together, they pushed the desk toward the door, its heavy legs screeching against the polished floor. Ava strained against its weight, but her determination matched the judge's. When the desk was finally wedged against the door, Judge Harper stepped back, breathing hard. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them a few minutes. Judge Harper pulled her phone from her robe pocket and dialed 911. The line rang once, twice. Then the call cut off, the screen flashing "no service." "No, no, no," she muttered, trying again. Nothing. Ava's voice was small. "They jammed it." Judge Harper looked at her sharply. How do you know that? Ava's eyes darted to the floor as if debating whether to say more. Because they'd done it before. At my house. Before I ran. Judge Harper froze. What happened at your house? They came for my dad, Ava whispered. He found something he wasn't supposed to. He said it was proof. He tried to warn people, but no one listened. And then one day they came for him. Just like now. The judge's breath caught as Ava's words sunk in. Proof? What kind of proof? What happened to him? Ava's gaze stayed on the floor. I don't know. He disappeared. The house was locked from the inside, but he was gone. They said he ran, but I know they took him. Her voice trembled. And now they think he told me something. They think I know what he found. Judge Harper exhaled slowly, the weight of the moments settling heavy on her chest. A father gone. A daughter hunted. A man who clearly had the power to erase people and bend reality to their will. The sound of splintering wood yanked her attention back to the door. A crack had formed near the lock, and the desk wedged against it creaked with each pounding blow. They didn't have much time. Judge Harper looked around again, her sharp mind snapping to the problem at hand. Her chambers had no windows, just the one exit, now blocked. Her eyes fell on bookshelf. It was tall, sturdy, and heavy, built into the wall. But on closer inspection, she spotted a gap, a faint seam in the wood. Wait, she murmured, stepping closer. She ran her fingers along the edge until, click, something shifted. A narrow section of the bookshelf popped outward, revealing an old, hidden service door. Ava's eyes widened. Where does it go? To the old basement archives, Judge Harper said. The courthouse is over 100 years old. This must have been part of the original design. Judge Harper pushed the secret door open further, revealing a dark, narrow passageway that sloped downward into shadow. The faint scent of dust and mildew wafted out. It wasn't welcoming, but it was their only chance. Come on, she urged, taking Ava's hand. Ava hesitated, glancing back at the barricaded door, now splintering under the relentless assault. What about Ron? Judge Harper's chest tightened at the thought of leaving her loyal bailiff behind, but she didn't have a choice. Ron can take care of himself, she said, though her voice betrayed the doubt she tried to suppress. We have to go now, Ava. The pounding on the door grew louder, angrier. Ava nodded, and together they slipped through the secret passage, the heavy bookshelf sliding back into place behind them with a faint thud. The sudden silence was jarring. Judge Harper switched on her phone flashlight, the small beam cutting through the dark. The passage was narrow, the walls made of stone that had aged with time, cracks running along the surface like veins. The air was colder down here, and the faint sound of water dripping echoed somewhere in the distance. Stay close to me, Judge Harper said, leading the way down the uneven path. Ava followed silently, her footsteps light but hurried. The tunnel stretched on longer than Judge Harper expected, twisting and sloping deeper underground. The air felt heavier the further they went, the weight of the courthouse above pressing down. How far does this go? Ava asked quietly. I don't know, Judge Harper admitted, her voice echoing off the stone walls. It should lead to the basement. From there, we might be able to find another way out. They rounded another corner, and suddenly faint light flickered in the distance. An old, dusty bulb hanging above a rusted metal door. Judge Harper quickened her pace, relief flickering in her chest. There, she said, come on. As they approached the door, Ava slowed, her small hand pulling at Judge Harper's sleeve. Wait, she whispered. Judge Harper turned back, her brow furrowed. What is it? Ava's eyes darted to the shadows behind them, her voice trembling. I think they're following us. Judge Harper froze, listening. At first, there was nothing. Just silence, thick and unmoving. And then, soft, deliberate footsteps. Slow. Measured, like someone was taking their time. A cold chill ran down Judge Harper's spine. Run, she said, her voice low but urgent. She grabbed Ava's hand and rushed toward the rusted door. The footsteps behind them quickened, echoing closer, growing louder. Judge Harper reached the door and grabbed the handle, twisting hard. It didn't budge. Locked. No, 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 she muttered, yanking on it again. The footsteps were close now. Too close. Ava let out a soft whimper, clutching at the judge's arm. They're here. Judge Harper slammed her shoulder against the door, desperate to force it open. It groaned, the old metal straining under the pressure. From the darkness behind them came a voice, low and calm, but chilling in its familiarity. You can't run forever, Judge. The door gave way with a loud screech, and Judge Harper pulled Ava through just as the shadows at the end of the tunnel seemed to move. She slammed the door shut behind them. bolting it as fast as her shaking hands allowed. For a moment, there was silence again, except for their breathing, ragged and quick. Ava clung to her, tears streaming silently down her face. Judge Harper held her close, her heart pounding against her ribs. Whatever was chasing them, whoever those men were, they weren't done, and the worst was yet to come.